Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Botkin, and today we're going to go through my module for my class, Modern Art 1900 to 1989, Cosmopolitan Art of the Majority World. So I will share my screen so that we can take a look at the slideshow. All right, so as you can see here, this is going to be week 4 of our course, Art for Revolution, the Egyptian Art et Liberté group. There are 2 required sources for the students: Long Live Degenerate Art, which was the manifesto of the group, and the Introduction to Al-Tatwar by Alexandra Dika Siegerman. So today's discussion, we're going to cover the following topics. Who is Art et Liberté? What motivated these artists and this group? And how did they connect with other artists? So to begin, I'd like to ask the class, how does war and conflict make us feel? From my class, I expect some potential answers like helpless, enraged, upset, maybe inspired to enact some sort of change or help. And then we'll move into what are some of the ways that we respond to conflict. So for example, we have here a meme that shows how by witnessing 9/11, Gerard Way formed the band My Chemical Romance. And from that band, Stephenie Meyer was inspired to write the Twilight books. Some other potential answers that I might expect from my students include protest, donate money, share information on social media, or create art. In this case, like Stephenie Meyer and Gerard Way, and like the artists we're going to be looking at. Next, I'm going to give my students some really brief historical context. So what was happening around the world in the 1930s? So January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed as Germany's chancellor, and he will further turn Germany into a fascist government. As part of controlling the culture of Germany, Hitler declared that modernist art did not have a home in Germany. Egypt was a British protectorate from 1882 to 1922, both unofficially and then later officially. A protectorate is a relationship between 2 countries in which one state is controlled and protected by another. And although the official protectorate ended in 1922, the British continued to have their hand in the Egyptian government and economy. This leads to students and working class Egyptians protesting against the British in 1935 and 1936. And then in May 9th, 1936, after the successful invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, Benito Mussolini declares the 14th year of the fascist era in Italy. So he had been the leader of Italy since 1922 and had helped turn Italy into a fascist government. Moving on, August 27th of 1936, the signing of the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty. After Italy invaded Ethiopia, Egypt feared rising tensions and a possible Italian invasion as well. So to combat this, they signed the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty with the United Kingdom. The treaty pulled British troops out of Egypt, except for those who were protecting the Suez Canal, which was still about 10,000 British troops. The treaty also stipulated that in case of a war, Egypt would provide Britain with all facilities and assistance, including airports, roads, and ports. Then July 17th to November 30th, 1937, we have the Entartekunst exhibition in Munich. Under the Nazi regime, Adolf Ziegler was named the head of the Reich Chamber of Visual Art. He was put in charge of a commission authorized to confiscate any art deemed modern, degenerate, or subversive from museums and art collections throughout the Reich. Some of these artworks were shown in the Entarte Kunst exhibition, which featured over 650 works of art. By degenerate, the Nazi Party meant modern art that was un-German, or that was Jewish or communist. In response to this rising act of fascism and totalitarianism in Europe, and specifically the Entarte Kunst exhibition, on December 22nd, 1938, the Arts et Libertés group published Long Live Degenerate Art. And then in 1939, they officially founded the group. So Arts et Libertés was a group of artists, writers, journalists, lawyers, scholars in Egypt. They were active from 1938 with the publishing of their manifesto, Long Live Degenerate Art, until 1948. So to review some of the context and some of the information about Arts et Libertés, we're going to look at the information given to us by Siegerman in her introduction. So Arts et Libertés was founded by Georges Hennin in 1939. He was born in Egypt and studied in Paris, and he helped establish a new organizational structure for artists in forming Arts et Libertés, which is self-identified artist groups. Before, if you wanted any sort of artist group or feedback, you got that through the official art academy system in Cairo. This group incorporated their Egyptian identity in their art on a more theoretical level rather than explicitly through the subjects. They also allied themselves with the International Federation of Independent Revolutionary Art, which is also known as FIARI, and this was founded by Diego Rivera and Leon Trotsky. They favored universalism of art, and they were anti-totalitarianism and fascism. I have said these words a few times throughout the course, so I really want to make sure that my students are understanding what these terms mean. So as we can see on the right side of the screen, I've included basic definitions of totalitarianism and fascism. So totalitarianism is a form of government and a political system that prohibits all opposition parties, outlaws individual and group opposition to the state, and exercises an extremely high degree of control over public and private life. Fascism is a political philosophy, movement, or regime that holds nation and often race above the individual. Fascist regimes have a centralized government, a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social control, and forcible suppression of opposition. So through the arts, we saw this with the Entarte Kunst exhibition in Germany and the confiscation of art in Germany. Next, we're going to dive into a reading discussion of the manifesto of Arts et Libertés, Long Live Degenerate Art. So I would like to pose to my students, what are some of the reasons that are mentioned in this manifesto for why it was written? Some potential answers I might be expecting would be to help art survive, specifically modern art, to speak out against what Germany and Italy are doing to artists. It's also a way to exchange thought and emotions with not only other people in Egypt, but people in Europe and throughout the world. For example, this manifesto was published in France and in the United Kingdom. And it's also a call to action for other artists and writers to stand up against what Germany and Italy are doing. I would also like to pose to my students, why would they want their art to be degenerate? This is typically a negative word. It does not have positive connotations. So some potential answers I might expect they were being ironic. They were playing on the word degenerate. It's also an act of protest against the German definition of degenerate, and they wanted to align themselves with the artists that Germany and Italy were calling degenerate. For example, Cézanne, Picasso, Kandinsky, Ernst. They have a whole list of artists in this manifesto. So after we have a basic understanding of the manifesto, I'm going to give them some context for the Surrealism art movement. We will be talking about it from an artistic sense, but it was also literary and philosophical. Although Art et Liberté was not solely a surrealist movement, they interacted with surrealism very heavily. So it was a movement that became popular in the 20th century. As I said, literary, philosophical, and artistic movement. And its purposes were to explore the workings of the mind and champion the irrational, the poetic, and the revolutionary. So part of what I really want to emphasize is the revolutionary aspect of surrealist art. So next we are going to look at some artwork that were produced by Art et Liberté members. So first up we have Ramses Yunan's very famous Untitled 1939 painting. So I'm going to demonstrate a visual analysis exercise of this work, and then I will prompt my class to do the same exercise at the next artwork that we're going to look at. So if we look at this painting, we can see that it has a very stark background, just white and blue. And in contrast, the figures that are in the foreground seem very dark and bold. We see a nude woman being propped up by her shoulders and knees. Her face is somewhat expressionless with her neck tilted back, but her feet are curled almost as if she's in pain. Under her are two more humanoid figures. They sort of resemble the larger woman in face and color and hair, but they are far less human-like. The figure on the left is rolled up almost like a ball, and the figure on the right lays with her face on the ground and her body almost totally unrecognizable. There's also a sort of gate-looking thing in the foreground, almost like a bicycle rack or a metal structure, but it's starting to bend and twist and become undone. The background, like I said, is stark and plain, but it almost is reminiscent of a vast desert. We can see that there are three figures in the distance, and they almost have a skeletal appearance, and like they're walking further away from these figures in the foreground. He uses dark, striking colors, like I said, and in combination with the colors, the shapes of these feminine figures seem to be morphing, indicating a lack of control over the horrors becoming this woman. And the figures in the background have also possibly been devastated due to their skeletal shape. But the fact that they are retreating away from these figures in the foreground might indicate that they no longer wish to witness the horrific metamorphosis of the woman in the foreground, or perhaps that they have already completed this transformation themselves. So as I demonstrated, first I described the formal elements of the painting, so what we're seeing, the colors, the lines, the weight, and then I made some claims and conclusions that were based upon these formal elements that I previously described. So next we're going to look at Mayo's Coup de Bâton from 1937. This is one of Mayo's most famous works and often an image used to describe the Egyptian surrealism movement. So like I said, for the last painting, we're going to do the same thing. First, we're going to describe the formal elements of this painting, some potential answers that I expect to get from my students, might talk about the busy composition, the way that it is multicolored, but the colors are also very muted. There seems to be many figures in the foreground with hedges and fences in the background on the right and left. The figures are abstracted, but they also resemble body parts. We see hands and arms and legs and feet. There is some furniture, as we can see in the right, some chairs, a desk. There's some other items like cigarettes in the bottom left-hand corner, pack of cigarettes, and there's a bottle and a glass on the table on the right. So some claims that we might be able to make based on our observations. Perhaps my students would say that Mayo is trying to represent the chaos of what is happening in the world at the time through this very busy and chaotic and disembodied painting, or maybe that the horrors of these forms are being hidden from the outside world with the hedges and fences on the edge of the painting. They're keeping this view from other people. There are many other claims or conclusions that we could come to, but this is just an example of what I am hoping my students would reach. Want to emphasize with my students the power of making art to be reprinted or be printed in the first place. So I'd like to ask them, why do you think these artists made art or adapted their art specifically for print? Some potential answers might be to help more people see it. It would be easier to pick up a book or read a pamphlet or pick up a newspaper than it would be to go to an art gallery, for example, or an exhibition. It would also potentially help people understand what the artist is trying to say, what the writer is trying to say. Oh, gosh, restart this one again. Ashbat, restart it. So I also want to emphasize with my students that in addition to making artwork like paintings, Ari Liberté produced their own journal, Al Risala, as well as books and pamphlets. Artists often worked with writers from the group to produce artworks to accompany their writings. So for example, this work here was first painted by Kamel El-Tamasani, La Facteur à la Parole, but he later adapted it to be reprinted in Albert Caussery's book, Les Hommes oubliés de Dieu. So I would like to ask my students, why do you think these artists made art or adapted their art specifically for print? Hopefully some of the potential answers would be to help more people see it. It might be easier for members of the public, especially the working class or women, to pick up a newspaper or a book or a pamphlet than it would be to go to an exhibition or a gallery. It could also help people understand what the writer is trying to say by providing a visual element. I would also ask my students, why do you think they published their own journals and writings in addition to making art? So some potential answers: maybe they wanted control over what was published. They wanted to support each other. They wanted their creative practices to remain of the people, something that would be easy to access. But they also had revolutionary ideals, and they recognized that art was something that was typically meant for the upper class. So this is a way of connecting with these working class people that they were trying to support as well. So after we discuss these artworks, before the end of the class, we'll do a discussion recap. So Ari Liberté was an anti-fascist, anti-totalitarian group with interests in the rights of women, the working class, and colonized countries. They were motivated to speak out against growing totalitarianism throughout the world and in support of artists who were being called degenerate. They established themselves in the international surrealist movement through letters, discussions, conventions, and art. Thank you so much. for listening and attending this course. Have a great day.